Thank you very much. Let's see if I get this.
Annie has the coolest opening.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the only cool part of this presentation. No, that's not true. Thank you all for having me here again. I love coming to this conference because it's so much in the space of where we're operating. And today, I'm actually not going to talk about any measures in particular. I'm going to talk about some stuff we're trying to do to actually kick the measurement enterprise into the 21st century. And try and you've heard some of it already, and sort of what's going on the ground, so that we can actually develop some measures that work and are meaningful and are useful. I'm going to be focused most of my presentation on sort of the NCQA HEDIS level things as far as programs, but these days are now so intertwined with ECQMs and everything that we're trying to do. So it's the focus goes across all these different programs, whether they're ECQMs or HEDIS, CCDs, or HEDIS in general, because we're really trying to create a measurement set that uses the same data model and the same logic models, such that it will reduce all that confusion and wonderful issues and probably put people like Bo out of a job eventually. But there's a ways to go yet. We're doing this as a pilot, if you will, within NCQA because we really want to improve quality measurement by increasing the measurement efficiency processes through the use of digital measures and other things, but also to try and align what's done in quality measurement with some of the best practices that are out there in data management. So there's a whole field of computer sciences and data management that use common data models and certain quality controls and other things. And the measurement space hasn't really been well aligned with that group for a while, but we're trying to get there because there's some really interesting information out there. And so, essentially, so I can get this to work. Wrong one. There it goes. So today I'm just going to talk about a couple sort of pilot projects we're doing. First, I'm going to talk about the HEDIS ECDS reporting standard, which is a new standard that's really designed to support the wider use of electronic clinical data for HEDIS reporting and other things. Next, I'm going to talk about how NCQA is actually validating ECQMs to improve the precision of data that can be used for ECQM reports, but also for HEDIS reports. And finally, I'm going to talk about a new collaborative that we've convened that represents NCQA's new commitment to sharing innovative ideas and promoting wider adoption of some of the best practices in the digital measurement space. So first about HEDIS ECDS. I like to call myself an ECDS entrepreneur because really what I've done here is we've created a new reporting standard, but it's essentially built on everything that HEDIS has done before, but also from the lessons we've learned in the ECQM space. It is intended to encourage the broader use of electronic clinical data. That is the overall goal. And in doing so, it provides a structured framework, again, for more standardization of the technical specifications and also some of the data flow and the data feeds going back and forth. We talk about interoperability all the time. Interoperability really has to advance beyond the proof of concept phase. So essentially we have to get it out of the shop demonstration mode that we've all been sort of used to working in and put it out there and make it usable and find business cases for using this. And so ECDS really provides a quality-oriented business case to establish access to and use of data that can support decision-making and quality improvement activities. And I was just joking with Kevin a few minutes ago that there's nothing like HEDIS to make people sit up and pay attention and get things done, because once it's there, it suddenly is on the national stage, and there's an incentive and a motivation. And thanks to my friends at STC for that cartoon. That was really, it's actually quite realistic. So when I say ECDS, what do I mean? ECDS are the network of data comprising information on members' healthcare experiences, data that folks at MyHIN are probably very familiar with. It builds on the existing HEDIS procedures for reporting data to NCQA in terms of how you consider supplemental data and how, what data are being used. However, it has a few key conditions that promote clinician access to this information that is being collected by a health plan for its HEDIS report. As I mentioned, HEDIS ECDS offers a framework to bring data together from multiple sources. So no longer do we have measures that are specified for a specific data source for a specific program. It's the idea of, by combining data together, you end up filling in those gaps of the missing information that create this full picture of a member's healthcare experiences, such that it can be used effectively, and it also can be more meaningful and more valuable. In adopting this kind of a framework, organizations will encourage communication across the healthcare system. Probably no argument there. Really, with the idea of ensuring that the information is reached by the information reaches the people who need it when it's most valuable to them. So not a year and a half later. Today, I'm going to be talking about focusing on 3 attributes of ECDS. In harmonizing the structure of these specifications with the clinical decision support standards, you heard about the CQL earlier and the FHIR standard that are being used in the space. Really what we're hoping to do is transform HEDIS and quality measurement in general from static representations of past performance. And we want to turn it into a dynamic tool that really supports decision making at the clinician level, at the payer level, at the practice level, at the system level, wherever. It's all, again, uniform. Because we want to increase the value of the information. We also want to make the information usable for more things than a HEDIS report. By incorporating these nationally recognized standards into HEDIS, we both reduce the error in the data extraction processing because we're actually able to produce electronic measures that can be shared with our customers. But also it makes this harmonization possible by using the common framework and the common language for ECQMs and for HEDIS measures and for any other measures that we build. You'd no longer need 3 different versions of the same measure to do different things, as you heard Kevin talk about earlier. The ECDS measures that we have today identify a parsimonious set of discrete data elements. So what we're hoping to do is narrow the focus of this interoperability challenges such that we sort of define some priority areas that are defined by the measures. And by solving these data sharing, these interoperability challenges, we can integrate this critical information to fill those knowledge gaps and make this information available to clinicians. So it becomes useful back at the point of care. Also, I think that by having the ability to make this information accessible to clinicians, I suspect will also make the clinicians more willing to share their information into these systems that are constantly requesting it because now there's a value proposition for them as well because they have a better picture of their patients. See where I am here. Okay. So HEDIS is new, and we're already updating it significantly. It's in its 3rd year, and for 2018, we've got a whole new structure and reporting format that we're going to be proposing for HEDIS. The key features of this are now you no longer report rates to NCQA. You report cohorts by categorization of data source. And this is intended to help us remove some of the field judgments made by plans and auditors and everybody else when they're defining supplemental data and building systems for supplemental data. I want them to stop doing that. We want to, again, create a standardized, systemized framework that we can certify down to at each of these categories that will just enable, again, much more efficiency, much more standardization, and much more accuracy. This new structure was developed with significant input from NCQA stakeholders, including the auditors, the data intermediaries, and of course our health plan customers. It actually does align with how we've been collecting data for developing new measures for ECDS. So we've actually been using this data collection protocol for some time. And I think we just sort of woke up and said, well, why are we doing this for testing but not actually for reporting? And so we now are. And I want to put in insert a little comment here that I don't have in my notes, but something that Kevin said this morning, it was very interesting. There are now 2 HEDIS measures that no longer require an encounter in the healthcare system. So I'll let that sink in for a bit as I go through the rest of this, but you have to understand this is the significance of the change in this framework. We're now looking for knowledge of the information that's available, and it does not require a hit with your provider to get you into that knowledge base. So, so as always, we have posted this information out for public comment, and we've done extensive stakeholder outreach. I've been on the phone many, many hours with our different stakeholders just discussing this idea. I talked to the PPQC. I'm here now, and we obtained feedback. This is all a consensus-based process because, again, we don't want to develop a measurement structure that then everyone else has to try and meet. We're trying to actually meet everybody halfway because that makes sense. Why we haven't done it before, I don't know, but we're doing it now, so better late than never. We've really sought specific feedback on the data definitions, on how we're defining the flow of the information to NCQA from the different entities within these different categories. So from the provider to the HIE, from the provider to the local clinical registry, from the provider right to the plan. And whether our guidance that is, again, was built off of our existing HEDIS guidance and our existing auditor roadmap and everything else that we have, whether those definitions make sense and whether the clarity around what we were just looking for and what we wanted in our HEDIS report was enough and adequate. And many people said it's getting there, and so we keep going. This is an idealized picture of what a data sharing and notification of critical event infrastructure might look like to inform care quality. this picture gets updated all the time. ECDS is envisioned to support a measurement structure that uses data from multiple sources to support decision making, but also quality improvement. So again, we want to see quality improvement. We don't want to really see quality measurement for no other purpose. Quality reporting is a byproduct of this process. And it's really not the driver, although right now it's what we're using as the incentive to push people who are interested in quality improvement and encouraging the quality organizations who are interested in working in this space to achieve this interoperability so we can achieve this scenario where the information flows where it's needed and who needs it, and there's not any major roadblocks for silly reasons. So now I'm going to talk about something really cool. Our newest program at NCQA is eMeasure certification. The goal of NCQA's eMeasure certification is to essentially pre-approve the data that can be used for HEDIS reporting, but again, like everything else, it cuts across all of our different programs. Comprehensive systematic testing of ECQMs can really improve the precision and the comparability of the information in these reports. Also, the experiential information gained from the certification process itself really substantially accelerates an organization's ability to identify common errors and programming problems in their system, because the errors tend to be systematic and they also tend to be frequent. So our goal for eMeasure certification really is to validate HIT vendor ECQM logic and QRDA reporting capabilities to ensure that they can correctly calculate and generate an accurate measure report. Lots of value here. NCQA's eMeasure cert process is the most rigorous process available for eMeasures at the moment. And we certify a vendor's QRDA report format to ensure that the data that is used to standard supplemental data is again, consistent, reliable, but it does give these vendors a distinct competitive advantage in HEDIS quality reporting because they've got now certified supplemental data, and many of you, I'm sure, know what that means. So the vendors who achieve this certification not only are improving the precision of their data and their calculation, but they're also reducing some of the HEDIS audit requirements. We've heard about Category 1 and Category 3 reports. I just wanted to cover a brief overview of sort of what we can do with them on the NCQA validation side. So the Category 3 reports are the standard structure for reporting aggregate measure data. We can look at this specific population of patients, health system, and time frame, and we can analyze and measure cohort level data, but nothing else. The Category 1 reports give us a standard structure for a single patient, and these reports contain the raw data that we can then use to determine whether a patient meets the IP, denominator, numerator, exclusions, exceptions, so on and so forth. So this is why we're all pushing for the QRDA ones because that gives us enough information to really understand where these patients are and what they still need. Certification for us involves creating a comprehensive set of measure issues to test that are based on the specifications, but also on a series of known programming errors. We use multiple test decks, each with a unique set of patients with a unique set of results and issues. These decks typically consist of 800 to 1,000 patients each, and we send them electronically as CCDs to our customers. We don't manually create any of this. We manually create the map for the measure, but this is all electronically created and in large volume. The tests are designed to test each node of a measure, each decision node within a measure, and especially what I call around the sort of gray areas, the boundaries of the measure, where we look for negative testing. This is where we find all our 98-year-old pregnant males, and we still do find them, I kid you not. But look for data elements that should not trigger a positive hit anywhere in the measure, because this is where we sort of find, and these test decks will tell us exactly which node, by looking at the result of the test deck, which node the error was in the calculation, so then we can go back, the vendor can correct their error, and we can send them a fresh test deck, so that there's no cheating on the test. You get a fresh deck every single time. We also test codes that apply to the measure. We also test codes that don't apply to the measure. So we look for those codes that either were outdated from a prior value set, or they might be in someone else's value set, but not in ours. So we look to see that they're pulling the right value set in and calculating the measure exactly correctly as we wish them to. Test decks are created for each individual measure. Again, generated from flow diagrams that we create internally. And again, we look really we use a black box testing model from these flow diagrams to create these test decks of this volume of patients. And again, they're designed to look for specific errors. Typical errors are things like age calculation, missing lab results, vendor-defined exclusions. So a vendor might have decided that these patients they don't really want to put them in there, so they exclude them, and we say, nope, they have to be in there. Also, misspellings in the QRDA files. That's a real common one that we find that has presented some real challenges for us initially, but we're starting to get our head wrapped around how to manage that. And then these decks are converted to CCDs and then sent to each customer for consumption by their system. So finally, a brief mention of our new collaborative that we have convened to try to create a collaborative testing environment. Much of the ECQM build in the past few years was done sort of via consensus with the different measure developers in the room. Most of this work, the ECDS work, is really done in reverse. So we start with the data collection process and we work backwards towards the measures. And so this collaborative is essentially a group of over 24 organizations that have volunteered to participate because of their common interest in improving the quality measurement landscape. And there are vendors, there are plans, there are audit firms, there are anyone who is somewhat technologically savvy participating because you need to bring some value to this. But we're all looking at HIT interoperability solutions for improving measurement. The collaborative itself is designed essentially as an open forum for the exchange of information and ideas and innovative solutions in the measurement space. We convene monthly with an open agenda to discuss issues and problems, and also as we move towards the end of this year, we're going to be putting up some testing resources and asking organizations to pull down these resources and test them in their system and send back not only their results, but also the experience of what they found when they tried to do this from end to end. So we're going to be posting digital measure HEDIS packages and essentially trying to build a process from which a vendor could go onto our customer service portal, download a package, pull value sets off of our Fire server, and then calculate measures and send them to us almost seamlessly or flawlessly. And so, like I said, NCQA will be posting some resources for this. So it's you have to come to the table with some of your own resources and your own time and things like that. But we're actually putting up some stuff and we're making available much more transparently the measure specifications, the measure processing, and the pieces that we normally would sort of launch on you at each new HEDIS release. And now it's going to be done sort of during the development phase because again, we need to be much more agile with this, that the measure development phase is long, expensive, and drawn out, and the only way to accelerate it is to work closely with customers who are trying to do this every day and find out what we can change now and try and create a new infrastructure for how measures are actually even developed so we can get to those measures that we all want and maybe significantly modify or get rid of some of those measures that just don't have any value anymore in this entire proposition. This is all done in the guise of reducing measurement burden and producing digital measure packages. And I say digital measure packages, they should be digital measure presents. The present should have everything in it that you would need to construct a measure report for HEDIS and or for ECQM or PCMH, or depending on what program you're going to be interested in reporting to. But again, there's still some things that are not machine readable even in ECQMs that still fall in the guidance section. This is very true in HEDIS, and it's still very true in the ECQM land. And so we're still building some of the templates for how to express in CQL attribution, how to express continuous enrollment, so that the queries are actually performed consistently. And there's a lot of mapping and there's a lot of discussions that still have to happen before those things are done. We hope to have them validated at HL7 by the fall. We will see. At the end of this all, we are hoping to have a conference. We're hoping to have a Connectathon-style conference around quality measurement. It was initially scheduled for this fall. It's now being bumped by our C-suite folks to probably early next year. But the focus of this conference will be looking at harmonization of measures using these new expression formats, the HL7 international standards for measurement, end-to-end testing of the processes. So we'll not only have demonstrations of what the collaborative has learned over the summer, but we're hoping to bring in people who will do it right there at the conference. So when I say Connectathon style, hackathon style, we want to see people who can download a measure package right there while they're sitting in a room with people and then demonstrate what their result was and then stand up and talk about it. So it's going to be, agenda still being developed. But again, we really want to promote interoperability standards using quality measures as an incentive and a driver, and we have to engage a lot of stakeholders at a very frequent process to do so. But again, we're looking forward to a very highly interactive year, both between the collaborative and through this conference, and we'll hope that it will lead to some real demonstrations of how the measures can be expressed, how the measures can be used. And I believe I have time for a few questions.
All right, so this is another one of our national experts. You got an opportunity to a small group to some way for us to be notified of the conferences you were talking about, the Connect-a-thon?
Yes. If you send an email to ecds@ncqa.org with a question about ECDS or an interest in being on the list for the conference, that'll get there. It goes. We have a team monitoring the email box. That's correct.
Hi, Ben. This is Bo over here. I just wanted to clarify the eMeasures program. So if a vendor were to go through that and achieve your certification successfully, are you saying that that vendor could generate Category 1 QRDA files, send them to the payer, and the payer could turn around and submit those as part of their calculation for to NCQA, and that would be considered legitimate supplemental clinical data? If so, that would be a huge...
Yep, for that measure, yep. And I think right now the most number of measures that we have certified are 23 or 24, but we have about 5 or 7 vendors who are still going. There's 5 who have already been certified for those 23 or 24 we have available. We're actually adding in some additional ECQMs that are not NCQA measures to the certification process. And we have, I think, 3 vendors who are also starting to go through the process now. So we're looking to get more and more measures that are, again, relevant and valuable to the NCQA programs, but also now supplemental data probably should go away eventually. It was a category created for HEDIS, and it's past its time. And so we're trying to, again, remove that.
I applaud that effort. That's a very significant development.
No one has told me it's a bad idea yet. So
With regard to being able to send the Category 1 in a format to payers as standardized data, would that be considered then standardized and with regard to non-standard? So, for example, if I get a file and it's coming over in this format, it would be considered standardized and I wouldn't have to worry about something falling out because it was non-standard?
Right. So I should also mention that the QRDA files are not 100% perfect, and there's still some question about the quality of the QRDA files. We have our auditors out now, and I think over the summer we're also going to be having them check some of this to make sure that. So right now it should be considered standard data, standard supplemental data if you're using a certified vendor. There's still some areas where we're looking to make sure that is true. The non-standard data is still going to be an open question for now. We're trying to create definitions for the non-standard data as it applies to this, but that's work that's still ongoing. Especially as the new measures come out, because the new measures are not using data elements that are typically found in structured standard claims codes and other places where it's.
Hi, so are the test stacks part of the resources that are out on the NCQA posting resources? Do we have access to those test stacks?
We will be publishing some test stacks and other links to synthetic data as part of the collaborative. We have to firm up which measures we're actually going to be posting to do that with. And they'll be done, we'll probably be posting some test stacks to have people, again, it's a sandbox. We want people to play with stuff. You won't get any certification credit for doing it successfully through the collaborative, but we should have significant data up there.
So you're speaking to a kind of an advancement as far as, and it really is a nice piggyback off of what Dr. Larson was talking about as far as the advancement of the QRDA files as well. So a question that I know some of the folks that we're getting together with, where we have the physicians and the payers in the same room, some of the questions coming up regarding the QRDA files are that it's ECQM focused now, right? And there's this slew of other measures that are HEDIS measures that are not currently captured. So first, could you speak to, I don't know if there's any, maybe this is maybe a better question for Dr. Larson, but I don't know if your thoughts on how you see that gap closing.
So yes, there's a couple different efforts going on simultaneously. One is we are, wherever possible, particularly for the behavioral health and mental health area, creating ECQMs and testing them to be NCQA stewarded ECQMs for specialties and so on and so forth. But again, we're just taking the existing HEDIS measures and doing that kind of work and creating a functional tested ECQM. It's time-consuming and expensive, but we're doing it to NQF criteria, so which says that we're doing it in different vendor systems and getting the data, patient-level detail for these things. We have a task force right now that are looking at which HEDIS measures that exist right now should be flipped to ECDS. So ECDS is a whole different set of rules and information, allowable data, and so on and so forth. And in that process, they're thinking about not just do we flip a measure over and convert it like we did to the ECQM, but do we reevaluate the measure and just sort of deconstruct it and reconstruct it. And that's particularly important for measures like the childhood immunization status, where we have, I think, 18 numerators right now in a measure, and that's just, and so we're really trying to sort of figure out, before we make any rash moves, what we should be doing. And I am, as disruptor in chief in NCQA, really pushing people's buttons and pushing the envelope, I think, to things that are more in line with the provider level clinical data. So no longer, I don't personally, this is on the record, but don't tell Peggy I said this out loud to an audience. I don't think that measure definition should be defined by payer. So in the continuous enrollment, most of the measures, I thought I'd get that kind of reaction. Payers of stratification, it should come later. That can be done in some of the strata definitions, but when you're getting the feeds from the providers have all kinds of payers. They have all kinds of people who come in and out and go back and forth and come back and forth. And we've stuck with this definition of a denominator cohort for so long. It's hard to make change in the measurement community, but I think that these things are sensible, and they just, for efficiency purposes, but also just because it's where the data is coming from and how it's being stored and aligning with what other people are doing. We shouldn't create another process on top of that. So basically, long way around your question is we're looking at these things, and the decision hasn't been made whether we just only put new measures in here and let the other ones kind of retire as they become less relevant because we have better measures in there, or whether we try and deconstruct and reevaluate what exists. But that's a very time-consuming process because they have to be retested. It involves discussions with our measure champion teams who own each of these individual measures to find out that we're still meeting the clinical intent of the measure. We're still doing things that make sense for the reporting program in QI.
Thank you. Yeah. You answered a few questions I had actually on one answer. That's great. Yes.
I just had a question. What you referenced that there was 2 new clinical measures that did not require a HIT.
Yep.
Can
Depression
you expand
screening
on that?
and pneumococcal vaccination status coverage, 2 new ECDS measures.
So now they have claims when they come in and they do that, but so help
So
me
you're allowed to
understand
use, so for ECDS, your claims is one of the clinical data sources, but you're also allowed to use your EHR feeds, you're allowed to use HIE data, clinical registries, you're allowed to use case management. And so what you can define your population any way. So for the pneumococcal vaccination status is the one I'm most familiar with because I developed it. Essentially, it looks for both of the new the guideline recommended vaccines at the right interval for patients over 65. But since they're longitudinal, we don't expect you to come in and get a provider to tell you that this person actually exists and doesn't have one of those vaccines. We expect you to link to the IAS, and when you have a membership file, say I'm responsible for these people in my Medicare program, and which ones don't have a vaccine.
Okay.
So we've been, like I showed you the SEC thing, so we've been linking up with the payers with their local IAS systems, with their other sources of this information. And the measure will just say it doesn't matter if the patient came in and saw anybody in they were enrolled in your program. Therefore, you should know whether they've had the guideline recommended pneumococcal vaccines.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for asking that question. If anybody else who got that answer right, I was just saying, if you got that answer right, you already guessed that you get a free T-shirt and a cup of coffee during the next break.
I had a follow-up question.
Okay.
So for the depression screening, then I'm guessing if it's not just looking for claims, it's looking for actual, like a screening score?
Yep. So there's a number of screening tools that are listed in the measure specification, many of which are currently being administered either through web APIs or in open enrollment periods through providers, through different systems, all of which count. And so we're looking for a total score, just that indicates we're looking for a total score or the form being completed in a number of different ways for the depression screening. So we don't unfortunately have the vocabularies to define all the tools' total scores yet, and that's something we're working on. Right. So supplemental data doesn't exist in ECDS. But yes, so the way you would normally think about it is, yes, it could be either from a case management, for your depression case management program, or from a provider EHR registry that's been created to track depression or depression screening. And so we're working towards getting both vocabularies up to date so we can use all those tools, but also find ways we can actually rejigger the specification. So there's a difference between, there's two screening measures. This is another sidebar, but I find this fascinating. There's an unhealthy alcohol use screening measure and a depression screening measure, both of which look for the use of a screening tool. The alcohol screening measure has a different response score for males and females and which tool you use. And we were able to use CQL to express that very specifically, because the CQL, unlike the QDM logic standard, actually you don't need a code for a number or for a variable that appears in your data. We can actually say, look for this value in your data, and over this value equals positive screening score, under this value equals negative screening score. So the alcohol screening measure, we can do that because we have, for the audit C, we have the line codes and the SNOMED that we need to do that define a total score. For the depression screening, only about half the tools have those codes and vocabularies defined. So the algorithms for the alcohol screening measure in the CQL looks very nice. It's very specific, it's very accurate. Whereas in the depression screening, we still have some codes that say positive depression score found. So that's someone on the back end looking up and mapping that to something else, saying, yes, it was a positive depression score. And I'm less happy with that, but I think we'll be able to fix that in the next iteration.
As we're talking about the non-standard data and how that doesn't really relate to ECDS, the question that I have at every single meeting that we have about this is about physical activity in the weight control scores for children.
Yep.
I didn't know if you have any updates on that. Not looking for a code, because I know that's not really something there, but we really struggle with how to report that to the payers, and that drops our quality scores all the time.
So the hot measures on the list of which ones we should convert over to ECDS or some other way of redefining the measure, hybrid measures, obviously, high supplemental data use measures are the ones that are on that list. People keep suggesting that weight monitoring and counseling, BMI counseling, is a great measure for ECDS. I actually disagree. I think that's a standard. I don't even think it really needs to exist as a measure anymore. I also didn't say that on the record. This is exactly the kind of feedback we hear, because you're spending a lot of time and money building something for a measure that everybody should be doing and is really more of a standard of care, not, BMI is just even a transactional EHR can calculate BMI. Yes, there's some follow-up components about counseling for people who are of a higher risk, but those are the new measures. We just redefine the data completely, and I think that's one measure that probably will just end up slowly sort of fading out as the new measure that we're doing. We're developing a physical activity for older adults measure targeted for 2020 sometime, and I'm hoping the learnings from that will inform the other measures.
There's just a lot of incentive money floating around that one particular measure.
And that's why it's still there. It's the incentive money's there. It's built into accreditation programs, accountability and rankings and ratings and everything else. And you can't just make them disappear magically, because there's a huge, long process to unwind that.
Do you have a question back there? Okay, good.
So I had a question on what is the feeling for the use of like a third-party reporting tool as far as exactly the measures we've been talking about? You watch a provider workflow, if they didn't click the correct box in the correct sequence, it's like it never happened. But when you read through their, patient plan or their notes, it clearly may have had the discussion with the patient.
Right.
So if you're using maybe a third-party reporting tool that can pick up keywords or normalize that data into checking the box, can you use that third-party reporting tool to meet your quality measures?
Not yet. I'm hoping soon, though. So the alcohol screening measure I just mentioned was the first time we've actually ever used NLP as part of our field test for the measure. And we looked at that exact issue of, who was actually being asked these questions, what were the responses, where was it in the data. It was very informative. I think that the manual medical record review version of measure testing is gone by the wayside. It's too expensive and it's not accurate enough for us. But this experience, and I'm looking at NLP solutions. I think over the next couple of months, we're talking with these different third-party vendors, talking with the academics who are doing this within their own systems to find out, is this ready for some kind of prime time national measurement strategy? And I think it's very close for some areas that have had a lot of work in this space.
We only have time for one more question. I have the mic, so I get to ask the question right now. So to kind of summarize, as you're talking about the shift from the supplemental clinical data and the proprietary formats that I know we have, at least in our state, what's your advice to the health plans as far as preparing themselves for accepting QRDA Category 1 files?
Well, so my perspective is I think the QRDA is here to stay. I think it's going to be for the next foreseeable future. Again, everyone is moving towards using these standards. The international standards are the way to go. So I think it is important. I think it's worth the investment, and I think it really, as you're looking to accept these kind of files, think about it in the context of what MyHIN's doing as far as creating this one report model and how that data can then be used because you're using those standard formats. Look to there's some very innovative companies out there that are not only building the QRDA mapping tools, but also the quality controls on QRDA. And so, again, search around and find them. But I do think it is. I think it is the future. And until a better standard comes along, and no one's really developing one that I'm aware of, I think patient-level detail files in a QRDA highly standardized format are what quality measurement is going to be doing. Okay.
Let's hear it for our speaker back.
Thank you.